Left broken a T, the altar on his wedding. The billionaire never expected his PA to save the day. 300 guests, 10,000 white roses, one missing bride, and exactly 6 weeks before a billionaire loses everything. The church bells had already stopped ringing when Marcus Ashford realized the truth. She was not coming. The woman he was supposed to marry, the woman who was supposed to walk down that aisle in a designer gown worth more than most people's homes, the woman who had agreed to become his wife in front of the most powerful people in the city. She had vanished, and Marcus was standing alone at the altar, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes pressing into his back like knives. Now, before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever stood in a moment where everything you built threatened to crumble around you? Where the silence surrounding you felt louder than any scream? Where the people watching you were not cheering for your success, but waiting, almost hungrily, for your failure? If you have, then you understand exactly what Marcus Ashford felt in that cathedral. And if you have not, then stay with me, because this story is about to show you what happens when a man who controlled everything suddenly controls nothing. What happens when the person meant to save him disappears? And what happens when salvation comes from the last place he ever expected? If you enjoy stories about unexpected love, impossible choices, and the moments that define us, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Trust me, you will not want to miss what happens next. And drop a comment telling me where you are watching from today. I love hearing from all of you around the world. Now let us return to that cathedral. Let us return to Marcus Ashford, and let us witness the moment his carefully constructed world began to fall apart. The cathedral was ancient. St. Augustine's had stood on that hill for over 200 years, its marble walls witnessing generations of weddings, christenings, and funerals. Stained glass windows stretched toward the vaulted ceiling, filtering afternoon sunlight into fractured rainbows that danced across the polished stone floor. 10,000 white roses had been arranged throughout the space, their fragrance heavy in the air, their beauty meant to celebrate love and new beginnings. Instead, they surrounded a man experiencing his most public humiliation. Marcus Ashford was not accustomed to humiliation. At 34 years old, he had built a reputation that made grown men nervous in boardrooms. He had taken his father's modest manufacturing company and transformed it into Ashford Industries, a global empire worth billions. He had survived hostile takeovers that would have destroyed lesser men. He had navigated market crashes that sent competitors into bankruptcy. He had faced betrayals from people he trusted, and he had emerged stronger every single time. But none of those battles had prepared him for this silence. The organist had stopped playing 11 minutes ago. Marcus knew because he had counted every second, a habit born from years of controlling every variable in his life. Counting kept him grounded. Counting kept him focused. Counting reminded him that time was simply another resource to be managed. But these 11 minutes felt different. Each second landed like a physical blow to his chest. Each moment stretched into an eternity of whispered speculation and barely concealed judgment. The murmurs had started at minute 3. Quiet at first, just the rustle of fabric as guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then came the whispered questions passed from pew to pew. Where is she? What is happening? Did something go wrong? By minute 7, the whispers had grown into a low, persistent hum that filled the vaulted ceilings like angry bees trapped in amber. By minute 11, the hum had become something worse. Anticipation. The kind of anticipation that comes when people sense they are about to witness something spectacular, something catastrophic. Marcus kept his posture perfect. His tailored charcoal suit fit him flawlessly, custom made by the same Italian designer who dressed European royalty. His dark hair was precisely styled. His jaw remained set in a line so rigid it could have been carved from the same ancient marble that surrounded him. From the outside, he looked exactly as he always looked, composed, untouchable, in complete control. Inside, his mind was racing through consequences. He thought about the board members sitting scattered throughout the congregation. He could feel their eyes on him, calculating, reassessing. Victor Pemberton was there, a man who had served on the board for over 2 decades and who had never fully accepted Marcus's leadership. Marcus did not need to turn around to know that Victor was already whispering to his allies, already spinning this disaster into an opportunity. He thought about the society photographers positioned near the back of the church. They had been invited to document a fairy tale wedding between one of the city's most powerful executives and his beautiful fiancée. Instead, they were documenting something far more valuable to their editors. A scandal, By tomorrow morning, Marcus's humiliation would be plastered across every financial publication and gossip column from here to Hong Kong. He thought about his mother, sitting in the front row. Eleanor Ashford had dressed impeccably for her only son's wedding, a designer hat perched at an angle that Marcus noticed she had adjusted nervously at least a dozen times. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. She was not looking at him. She was staring straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the whispers surrounding her, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her react. His younger brother James sat beside her, continuously checking his phone with an urgency that confirmed what Marcus already knew. Vivian was not delayed. Vivian was not stuck in traffic or dealing with a wardrobe malfunction or calming pre-wedding nerves. Vivian was simply not coming. The realization should have devastated him. This was supposed to be his wedding day. This was supposed to be the moment he committed his life to another person, the moment he promised forever in front of everyone who mattered. A normal man would be feeling heartbreak right now. A normal man would be fighting back tears, struggling to comprehend how the woman he loved could abandon him so publicly. But Marcus Ashford was not a normal man, and his engagement to Vivian Laurent had never been about love. It had been about a single sentence in his father's will. 8 months earlier, Marcus had sat in a suffocating conference room overlooking the harbor while his father's lawyers read the final amendments to the company charter. His father had been dead for 3 weeks by then, taken suddenly by a heart attack that no one had seen coming. Marcus was still processing the grief, still trying to fill the void left by a man who had been both his mentor and his harshest critic. And then the lawyers had read that sentence. In order to retain full executive authority over Ashford Industries, Marcus Ashford must be legally married before his 35th birthday. Not engaged, not promised, married. Marcus had laughed when he first heard it. He had actually laughed, certain that his father was playing some posthumous joke. But the lawyers had not laughed. They had explained in excruciating detail that the amendment was legally binding, that his father had added it 6 months before his death, clearly anticipating that Marcus would need motivation to build a life beyond the boardroom, that without a marriage certificate filed before his 35th birthday, Marcus would lose majority voting power over the company his family had built for 3 generations. His birthday was in 6 weeks. At first, Marcus had ordered his legal team to find a loophole. There had to be a way around it. Some technicality, some legal maneuver, some strategy that would allow him to maintain control without actually getting married. His lawyers had worked around the clock for months. They had consulted experts in corporate law, family law, contract law. They had examined every word of that amendment from every possible angle. There were no loopholes, only compliance. So Marcus had done what he always did when faced with an impossible situation. He had found a solution. Vivian Laurent was beautiful, ambitious, and came from old money that made her comfortable navigating his world. More importantly, she understood what he was offering. Not love, not romance, a transaction. She would become Mrs. Ashford, gaining access to his status, his security, his proximity to power. He would satisfy his father's requirement and maintain control of his company. It was supposed to be clean and simple, a business arrangement between 2 adults who knew exactly what they were getting. Standing alone at that altar, surrounded by whispers and judgment and the heavy fragrance of 10,000 white roses, Marcus realized how naive that assumption had been. The priest cleared his throat gently, pulling Marcus from his thoughts. "Mr. Ashford," the older man murmured, leaning closer with practiced discretion. His voice was kind but uncertain. "Perhaps we should address the congregation, offer some explanation?" Marcus did not respond immediately. He was calculating exit strategies, public statements, damage control. But every path led to the same destination: humiliation, weakness, failure. And then his eyes shifted. It was almost involuntary, a reflex born from 4 years of relying on one person to anticipate problems before they reached his desk. His gaze moved toward the narrow alcove near the side entrance of the cathedral, toward the shadows where most people would see nothing worth noticing. But Marcus was not most people, and the woman standing in those shadows was not just anyone. Josephine Marlowe stood perfectly still, half hidden behind a stone column, a tablet clutched against her chest like armor. She was wearing a simple dove-gray dress, professional but elegant, the kind of outfit that allowed her to blend into any environment while still commanding quiet respect. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, revealing high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. She had been his personal assistant for 4 years, longer than any predecessor had lasted, and there was a reason for that. Where others had crumbled under the pressure of his demands, Josephine had adapted. Where others had made excuses, she had found solutions. Where others had broken under his impossible expectations, she had simply raised her standards to match them. She knew things about him that no one else knew. She knew how he took his coffee. Black, no sugar, precisely 180 degrees. Not because he liked it that way, but because it reminded him of mornings spent with his father, drinking bitter coffee on the factory floor before Marcus had ever dreamed of boardrooms and billions. She knew which board members made him tense, and which reporters he actually respected. She knew the subtle shift in his posture that signaled an impending explosion of temper, and she knew the particular quality of silence that meant he was about to make a decision that would reshape markets. She had seen him at his worst and never wavered. She had defended his decisions to skeptical executives and demanding clients without ever seeking credit for herself. She had built her entire professional existence around keeping his world from collapsing, and right now she was the only person in that entire cathedral who was not watching him with pity or predatory interest. She was watching him with concern. Their eyes met across the crowded space, and in that fractured moment, something passed between them. An acknowledgement of disaster, a recognition of stakes, and beneath it all, a question that Marcus was not yet prepared to ask. Josephine took a single step forward, then stopped. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak but knew the distance between them made it impossible. Her expression said everything she could not say out loud. She knew what this wedding meant. She knew what failure would cost him. She knew that the empire he had built was hanging by a thread that was about to snap. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, not from panic, but from the sudden emergence of an idea so reckless it should have died the moment it formed in his mind. But desperate men do desperate things, and Marcus Ashford had never been more desperate in his life. "Josephine," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone despite the distance between them. "Come here." She hesitated for exactly one heartbeat. Then she began moving, weaving through the side aisle with the quiet efficiency that characterized everything she did. Her heels clicked softly against the stone floor. Guests nearest her turned to watch, their curiosity replacing their whispered speculation. Who was this woman? Why was she approaching the altar? What was happening? When she reached him, she stood close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something subtle, like jasmine and rain. He had worked beside this woman for 4 years, and he had never noticed that scent before. Or perhaps he had simply never allowed himself to notice. "The situation is deteriorating," she murmured, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Her professionalism was intact, even now. "I have already drafted 3 contingency statements for the press. Your legal team is standing by. We can manage this." "Those will not be necessary," Marcus said. Josephine's brow furrowed slightly. "Sir?" He turned to face her fully, blocking out the 300 pairs of eyes boring into his back. In this moment, there was only her. The woman who had seen him at his worst and never wavered. The woman who had spent 4 years standing behind him, supporting him, believing in him. The woman he was about to ask for the impossible. "I need your help," he said quietly, "not as my assistant, as something else entirely." Understanding dawned in her dark eyes, followed immediately by resistance. "Marcus, whatever you are thinking, I am thinking that I am 6 weeks away from losing everything my family built over 3 generations. He kept his voice low, urgent, meant only for her. "I am thinking that the woman I was supposed to marry chose to humiliate me rather than simply decline. And I am thinking that you are the only person in this room I trust." Josephine's breath caught. She glanced toward the empty aisle where Vivian should have been walking, then back at his face. The calculations happening behind her eyes were almost visible, the rapid assessment of risk and reward that made her invaluable in crisis situations. "Trust to do what exactly?" she asked. Marcus looked at the priest, who was watching them with polite confusion. He looked at the congregation, where whispers were spreading like wildfire. He looked at the cameras, poised to capture whatever happened next. Then he looked back at Josephine Marlowe, the woman who had always stood behind him, never beside him. "Stay where you are," he said. "Do not answer yet. Just listen." And then Marcus Ashford, billionaire, industry titan, and abandoned groom, told her exactly what he needed her to do. Now, before I reveal what Marcus asked her, and more importantly what she decided, I need you to pause and think. What would you do in Josephine's position? You have spent 4 years working for this man. You know his secrets, his weaknesses, his impossible standards. You have built your entire career around supporting him from the shadows. And now he is asking you to step into the light in the most dramatic way imaginable. Would you say yes? Would you risk everything you have built for a man who has never seen you as anything more than an excellent employee? Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to know what you would do. And if you are enjoying the story, take 1 second to hit that like button. It helps more people discover these incredible narratives, and it means the world to me. Now let us return to that altar. Let us hear what Marcus proposed, and let us witness the moment Josephine Marlowe made a choice that would change both of their lives forever. The words hung in the air between them, dangerous and impossible. "You cannot be serious," Josephine whispered, acutely aware that they were standing at an altar surrounded by hundreds of witnesses with cameras documenting every micro-expression on their faces. "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," Marcus replied. His voice was calm, controlled, the same tone he used when negotiating billion-dollar acquisitions. But there was something beneath that control, something she had never heard before: desperation. "The company charter is clear. Without marriage, I lose majority voting rights. The board will fragment. Everything my father built will be consumed by vultures within months. Then find another solution." Josephine's mind was racing through alternatives even as she spoke. Delay the requirement. Challenge it legally. Negotiate with the board for an extension. "I have had lawyers examining that charter for 8 months. Marcus's gray eyes held hers without wavering. "There are no loopholes. I have explored every legal avenue, consulted every expert, considered every possible strategy. There is only compliance." Josephine stared at him, searching for any sign that this was a test, a momentary lapse in judgment, anything that would make this moment make sense. But his expression held nothing but steady determination. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she demanded. "Stand beside me." His voice dropped even lower, barely audible even to her. "Complete this ceremony. Give me the time I need to secure the company's future." "That is insane." "It is pragmatic." Josephine laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving, quickly suppressed. She was aware of the guests watching them, aware of the cameras positioned to capture every moment. This conversation needed to look like a brief consultation, not a negotiation that could destroy both their lives. "Pragmatic," she hissed. "You are asking me to marry you in front of 300 people who came here expecting someone else. Someone with a designer gown and a diamond the size of a small country. I am asking you to save everything we have both spent years building." The words struck her harder than she expected, because he was right, was he not? She had invested 4 years of her life into Ashford Industries, not as an owner, not as a shareholder, but as its invisible architect. She had restructured failing divisions before anyone knew they were failing. She had negotiated impossible contracts that saved the company millions. She had quietly eliminated threats before Marcus ever knew they existed. If the company fell, so did her work. So did the legacy she had built in the shadows. So did everything she had sacrificed for a career that most people never even knew existed. There would need to be terms, she heard herself saying. The words came out before she could stop them, before her rational mind could override whatever instinct was driving her. Clear boundaries, legal protections. Hope flickered across Marcus's features, so brief she might have imagined it. "Whatever you require." This would be a business arrangement. She needed to say it out loud, needed to establish the parameters before this went any further. "Nothing more," agreed. "And when it ends," she continued, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her, "when the charter requirements are satisfied, I walk away with my career intact. No interference, no complications. No damage to my professional reputation. You have my word." Josephine looked down at the tablet still clutched against her chest. Inside that device were schedules, contracts, contingency plans, the architecture of a life built on preparation and control. She had planned for hostile takeovers, market crashes, PR disasters, medical emergencies, natural disasters, and every other conceivable crisis that could threaten Marcus Ashford or his empire. None of it had prepared her for this choice. "If I do this," she said slowly, measuring each word, "we do it properly. No half measures. No room for doubt or speculation. In public, we present a united front. Complete commitment, complete devotion. In private, we maintain professional distance." Marcus nodded. "Understood. And I need 60 seconds. Before he could respond, Josephine turned and walked briskly toward the small antechamber reserved for the bridal party. The door was heavy oak, carved with religious imagery that had witnessed countless brides preparing for their moment. Josephine pushed through it without ceremony, without hesitation, leaving gasps erupting behind her as conversations died mid-sentence and the entire congregation tried to process what they were witnessing. The antechamber was quiet, abandoned, filled with the ghosts of preparations that would never be completed. Vivian's makeup artist had left brushes scattered across a vanity table. A bottle of champagne sat unopened in an ice bucket, the ice long since melted. Flowers meant for the bridal bouquet lay wilting in a crystal vase. Josephine ignored all of it. She moved directly to the full-length mirror that dominated one wall and confronted her own reflection. The woman staring back at her was someone she barely recognized. Her hair was slightly disheveled from the tension of the morning. Her eyes were too bright, adrenaline and fear and something else mixing in their depths. Her chest rose and fell with barely controlled breaths. She had 45 seconds remaining. "What are you doing?" she whispered to her reflection. "This is madness. This is career suicide. This is crossing every line you have spent 4 years carefully respecting." But even as she spoke the words, her hands were moving, smoothing her dove gray dress, adjusting the simple pearl earrings she had chosen that morning without any idea they would become her wedding jewelry, pinching color into her cheeks, straightening her spine until her posture matched the composure she needed to project. 20 seconds remaining. Josephine thought about the years she had spent in the shadows, the crises she had solved without anyone knowing her name, the sacrifices she had made for a career that kept her invisible by design. She thought about her small apartment, her modest savings, her carefully constructed life that could be dismantled by one wrong decision. 10 seconds remaining. And then she thought about Marcus Ashford, not the billionaire, not the demanding boss, not the man who expected perfection and rarely offered praise. She thought about the vulnerability she had seen in his eyes moments ago, the desperation he had never shown anyone else, the trust he had placed in her, standing at that altar, asking her to save him. 5 seconds remaining. Josephine forced her expression into something that resembled serenity. She was not a bride preparing for her wedding day. She was a woman preparing for the most important negotiation of her life, and she would not show weakness, not to the cameras, not to the guests, not even to herself. She turned toward the door. When she emerged from the antechamber, the string quartet hesitantly resumed playing. The music was tentative at first, uncertain, the musicians clearly confused about what they were supposed to be accompanying. Then it grew stronger, more confident, as if the players had decided that whatever was happening, it required appropriate accompaniment. Heads turned throughout the cathedral. Conversation ceased. The entire congregation seemed to hold its breath as Josephine Marlowe stepped into the light. She walked with deliberate grace, her dove gray dress catching the fractured rainbows from the stained glass windows. Her expression was calm, composed, revealing nothing of the terror that churned beneath her carefully constructed surface. She did not see the confused guests or the flashing cameras or the shocked expression on Marcus's mother's face. She saw only the path ahead, narrow and uncertain, leading toward a future she could not have imagined when she woke that morning. Marcus extended his hand as she reached him. His gray eyes searched her face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that she was about to change her mind. Josephine met his gaze steadily and took his hand without hesitation. His fingers closed around hers, warm and surprisingly gentle. "Thank you," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "Do not thank me yet," she replied, keeping her voice equally soft. "We still have to survive the reception." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. Then it was gone, replaced by the composed mask he wore for the public. He turned to face the priest, guiding Josephine to stand beside him at the altar. The elderly clergyman looked between them with obvious relief. He did not ask questions. He did not demand explanations. He simply nodded once and opened his prayer book to the appropriate page. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice echoing through the cathedral, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony proceeded with remarkable smoothness, given the circumstances. The priest moved through the traditional vows with practiced reverence, his words filling the sacred space with promises of love, honor, and devotion. Josephine repeated each phrase when prompted, her voice steady, her eyes fixed on Marcus's face. "Do you, Marcus William Ashford, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Marcus said. His voice carried clearly through the cathedral, confident and certain. "And do you, Josephine Marie Marlowe, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Josephine felt the weight of 300 witnesses pressing against her. She felt the cameras capturing this moment for posterity. She felt the magnitude of what she was about to say, the way these two simple words would transform everything about her life. "I do," she said. Marcus produced rings from his pocket. Simple platinum bands that Josephine suspected had been intended for a different woman entirely, though she chose not to dwell on that particular detail. He took her left hand in his, and she noticed that his fingers trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. The hesitation lasted only half a second, but she noticed, and when she looked up at his face, she saw that he had noticed her noticing. "With the power vested in me," the priest proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Marcus turned to face her. For a moment, neither of them moved. This part had not been negotiated. This part had not been discussed. The kiss that would seal their arrangement was supposed to be ceremonial, meaningless, a performance for the cameras and nothing more. But when Marcus leaned toward her, when his hand cupped her cheek with unexpected tenderness, when his lips brushed against hers in the softest of touches, Josephine felt something she had not anticipated. A spark. The applause erupted around them, uncertain at first, then growing stronger as the congregation decided to embrace whatever narrative would allow them to celebrate rather than scandalize. Cameras flashed. Smiles appeared where suspicion had been moments before. The string quartet launched into a triumphant processional, and Josephine Marlowe, now Josephine Ashford, walked back down that aisle on the arm of her new husband, wondering what exactly she had just agreed to become. The reception was a blur of champagne, congratulations, and carefully worded compliments that masked barely concealed curiosity. Josephine stood at Marcus's side as guests approached in an endless stream, each one eager to meet the mystery woman who had somehow captured one of the city's most eligible billionaires. "How long have you known each other?" a silver-haired woman asked, her eyes sharp with gossip hunger. 4 years, Josephine replied smoothly. "We met through work." It was technically true. Everything she said for the rest of that evening would be technically true. She had learned long ago that the best deceptions were built on foundations of truth. "And you kept your relationship secret this entire time?" Another guest pressed. "How wonderfully romantic." "Some things are too precious to share with the world," Marcus interjected, his arm sliding around Josephine's waist with easy familiarity. His touch sent an unexpected warmth through her. "We wanted our time together to belong only to us." The guests sighed with satisfaction. The narrative was taking shape. Not a scandalous arrangement or a desperate solution, but a secret romance between a powerful man and the woman who knew him better than anyone. It was exactly the kind of story people wanted to believe. Board members approached with handshakes and careful nods. Their congratulations were more measured, their assessments more obvious. They were not here to celebrate love. They were here to evaluate stability. Josephine met each of their gazes directly, projecting confidence she did not entirely feel. Victor Pemberton arrived last. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, silver hair perfectly styled, expensive suit, perfectly tailored, smile perfectly insincere. He had served on the Ashford Industries board for 23 years, a remnant from an earlier era who had survived every leadership transition through political cunning and strategic alliances. "Marcus," he said smoothly, "what an unexpected turn of events." He extended his hand, and Marcus shook it briefly. "And this must be the new Mrs. Ashford." Josephine accepted his handshake. The grip was firm, assessing, the kind of handshake designed to establish dominance. "Mr. Pemberton," she replied, "I have heard so much about your contributions to the company. All good things, I hope." His smile did not reach his eyes. Josephine smiled back, equally insincere. Of course. She could feel Victor analyzing her, searching for weaknesses, calculating how this development might be used to his advantage. She had spent 4 years learning to read the politics of Ashford Industries. She knew Victor Pemberton was dangerous. She knew he had been waiting for an opportunity to challenge Marcus's leadership. And she knew, with sudden clarity, that this marriage had not eliminated that threat. It had merely changed the battleground. The evening continued until the last guest departed, and the final camera was packed away. By the time Marcus dismissed the remaining staff, exhaustion had settled over Josephine like a physical weight. Her feet ached from standing. Her face hurt from smiling. Her mind was spinning with everything that had happened and everything that was yet to come. Marcus guided her into a private conference room adjacent to the reception hall. The door closed behind them, sealing off the noise and expectations of the outside world. For the first time since the ceremony began, they were truly alone. Josephine exhaled sharply. "We need to formalize this now, before anything else happens." Marcus nodded. "My attorney is waiting." As if on cue, the door opened and a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses entered, carrying a slim briefcase. He did not ask questions. He did not express surprise. He simply set his briefcase on the conference table and began removing documents with the efficiency of someone who had clearly been prepared for this possibility. Josephine felt a chill run through her. "You anticipated this." Marcus did not deny it. "I planned for risk. That is what I do." The contract was thorough. Josephine read every page carefully, her eyes moving over dense legal language that covered every conceivable aspect of their arrangement. Marriage in name only. Separate residences within the same property. No physical obligation or expectation. A fixed term of 12 months with a public dissolution clause once corporate conditions were satisfied and an appropriate transition period had passed. Financial compensation for her participation was included, though Josephine found that she barely glanced at those numbers. Money was not why she had agreed to this. She was not entirely sure why she had agreed to this. Protection clauses covered her professional reputation. Confidentiality agreements ensured that the true nature of their arrangement would never become public knowledge. Exit terms guaranteed that she would emerge from this marriage with her career not only intact but enhanced. It was, she had to admit, an impressive document. Comprehensive. Fair. Exactly what she would have demanded if she had been given time to negotiate. "You planned for risk," she repeated quietly. "Did you plan for me?" Marcus met her eyes across the conference table. "No." "That is why this worked." Josephine signed her name at the bottom of the final page. Marcus signed beneath her. The attorney gathered the documents, placed them in his briefcase, and departed without ceremony. Silence settled between them. "This changes nothing," Marcus said finally. "Your position remains the same. You are still my executive assistant. Your responsibilities continue unchanged." Josephine stood, smoothing her dress with hands that she refused to let tremble. "That is where you are wrong." She met his eyes. No longer just his secretary. No longer just his solution. No longer the woman who stood in the shadows while he commanded the light. "From this moment on," she continued, "I am your wife in public. That means your reputation is now tied to mine. Every decision you make reflects on me. Every scandal that touches you touches me as well. I will not be treated as an accessory. I will not be managed like a problem. I am your partner in this arrangement, and I expect to be treated accordingly." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, though she could not quite identify what. Surprise, perhaps, or respect, or something else entirely. "You will be treated as a partner," he said finally. She accepted that for now. Outside the conference room, a car waited to take them to their separate destinations as agreed. Marcus would return to his penthouse. Josephine would go to her apartment to pack the essentials before moving into the guest wing of his residence. But as they walked side by side toward the exit, Marcus felt an unfamiliar tension building in his chest. This arrangement was supposed to be controlled, temporary, safe, a solution to a specific problem with clearly defined parameters and an inevitable ending. Yet the woman walking beside him was no longer invisible. She had stepped out of the shadows and into his life in a way that could not be undone by signatures or contracts or carefully negotiated terms. And for the first time since his father's death, Marcus Ashford realized that he had invited something unpredictable into his carefully ordered world. Something he could not manage with contracts alone. Something that might prove far more dangerous than any hostile takeover or corporate crisis. Something that felt, despite everything he had told himself, surprisingly right. The next morning, the world woke up married to a story it did not fully understand. Headlines filled financial news sites and social columns alike. Billionaire CEO marries in private ceremony. The PA who became a princess. Mystery bride steals Ashford's heart. Marcus Ashford secures future of Ashford Industries. The photos showed carefully chosen angles. Marcus, calm and composed, the picture of a confident groom. Josephine, elegant and reserved, impossible to read. They stood together at the altar, walked together down the aisle, posed together for photographers who had not known until that very moment that they were capturing anything other than a standard society wedding. The narrative took hold with remarkable speed. Social media buzzed with speculation about their secret romance. Financial analysts praised Marcus's stability. Society columnists praised Josephine's elegance. Everyone, it seemed, was eager to believe in the fairy tale. Inside the penthouse apartment Marcus had arranged for her, Josephine stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city she had navigated for years from behind a desk. Now every light below felt closer, louder, watching. The anonymity she had cultivated so carefully was gone. The shadow she had occupied so comfortably had vanished. She was visible now, and visibility came with consequences she was only beginning to understand. Her phone buzzed constantly on the kitchen counter. Messages from colleagues, distant relatives, acquaintances she had not spoken to in years. People who had never known her name were suddenly eager to claim proximity. Congratulations and curiosity arrived in equal measure. She did not answer any of them. A soft knock came at the door connecting her wing to the main residence. Josephine turned to find Marcus entering, jacket already off, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He looked exactly as he always did when preparing for a difficult meeting. "We have our first public appearance tonight," he said. No preamble, no small talk. That was typical Marcus. Direct, efficient, focused on the task at hand. Josephine straightened her spine. Tonight? A charity gala that was already scheduled months ago. Canceling would raise questions we cannot afford to answer. He crossed the room to stand near her, looking out at the same city lights she had been contemplating. "We need to establish our presence as a couple, demonstrate unity, show the board that this marriage is solid. Then we should review expectations," she replied. They sat across from each other at the kitchen island, the contract open between them like a neutral witness. For the next hour, they discussed protocols and parameters, how close they would stand, how often they would touch, how they would respond to personal questions, how they would navigate curiosity without revealing truth. In public, Marcus summarized, "We present unity, confidence, no hesitation." And in private, Josephine replied, "We respect boundaries." Agreed. The car ride to the gala that evening was silent, but not uncomfortable. Josephine watched reflections slide across the tinted glass as the city flowed past them. Marcus reviewed notes on his phone, then stopped and set it aside. "You handled the reception yesterday better than anyone I know," he said quietly. Josephine turned to look at him. "That was my job. It is no longer just your job." His gray eyes met hers in the dimness of the car. "You are my wife now. Not my assistant, not my employee, my wife. The distinction matters." She considered his words carefully before responding. "The distinction matters to the public. In private, I am still the woman you hired 4 years ago. Are you?" His voice held a note she could not quite identify. Curiosity, perhaps, or challenge. Before she could respond, the car pulled up to the entrance of the Grand Wellington Hotel. Photographers lined the red carpet. Flashes exploded like lightning as Marcus emerged and offered his hand to help her from the vehicle. The gala unfolded exactly as predicted. Cameras, donors, questions disguised as compliments. Josephine moved beside Marcus with quiet precision, responding when appropriate, smiling when required, grounding him when conversations veered toward speculation. She noticed things no one else did. Which investors watched her too closely, their gazes calculating rather than admiring? Which reporters circled like sharks, waiting for a mistake? Which board members whispered to each other after speaking with them, their expressions suggesting agendas that had nothing to do with charity? When Marcus's hand hovered near hers during a particularly aggressive exchange with an investment banker who asked too many personal questions, she did not pull away. She leaned into the contact, presenting a united front that silenced speculation more effectively than any verbal response could have. Later that night, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the noise of the gala softened behind them. "You are adapting quickly," Marcus observed. His voice held something that might have been admiration. "I have always adapted." Josephine kept her gaze on the glittering skyline. "You just never had to see it." He considered that for a long moment. "No, I suppose I never did." Silence stretched between them, but it was a different kind of silence than she was accustomed to. Not the professional distance of employer and employee, not the careful neutrality of their contractual arrangement. Something else entirely, something that felt dangerous. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that Josephine had not anticipated. She attended meetings as Marcus's wife, sitting beside him in boardrooms where she had previously stood against the wall taking notes. She quietly influenced decisions as his most trusted advisor, offering perspectives that no one else dared to voice. Staff adjusted to her new status with varying degrees of grace. Some resented her elevation, whispering in corridors about secretaries who got above their station. Others followed her lead without question, recognizing that her proximity to Marcus came with power they would be wise to respect. Marcus found himself asking for her opinion before finalizing choices he once made alone. What do you think about the Henderson acquisition? How should we handle the Shanghai situation? What is your read on the new VP of Operations? The questions surprised both of them, but Josephine answered honestly, and Marcus listened carefully, and somehow that became their new normal. One evening, after a particularly tense board meeting where Victor Pemberton had pushed for a vote of no confidence that ultimately failed, Marcus paused outside her office door. "You challenged me in there," he said, in front of the entire board. Josephine looked up from her laptop. "I challenged the idea, not you. The distinction matters." "Yes." She held his gaze steadily. "You were wrong about the Asian market projections. Someone needed to say so." A pause stretched between them. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus smiled. It was small, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. "Someone did," he acknowledged. "And you were right." That night, Josephine returned to her wing of the penthouse and removed her wedding ring, setting it carefully on the counter. She stared at it longer than she intended, watching light catch the platinum band and scatter in tiny rainbows across the marble surface. This arrangement was supposed to be controlled, predictable, safe, a business transaction with clearly defined parameters. But something was shifting, not in the headlines, not in the contracts, in the quiet spaces where neither of them were pretending. And Josephine realized with a mix of resolve and unease that the most dangerous part of this arrangement was no longer public scrutiny or board politics or the threat of exposure. It was how natural it was beginning to feel. Victor Pemberton thought he could destroy what Marcus and Josephine were building. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated a woman who had spent 4 years solving problems before anyone knew they existed. If you are Team Josephine, drop a muscle emoji in the comments below. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that quiet strength is still strength, that the people working in the shadows deserve recognition, that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one standing at the podium. Now the storm was about to get worse, much worse, because Victor Pemberton was not finished, and the attack he was planning would force Marcus and Josephine to confront something far more dangerous than board politics. It would force them to confront the truth about what they were becoming to each other. The first real test came without warning, exactly 3 months into their arrangement. It happened during a quarterly leadership dinner at Ashford Industries, the kind of event designed to look informal while every word spoken carried weight. Long tables stretched through a private dining room at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Low lighting created an atmosphere of intimacy. Expensive restraint characterized every interaction. The board members sat scattered among senior executives, watching Marcus closely and watching Josephine even more closely. She felt it the moment they entered the room. The subtle pause in conversations, the way eyes lingered just a second too long, the assessing gazes that measured her worth with every step she took. She was no longer being evaluated as an assistant who had risen too far. She was being measured as a potential liability. Marcus sensed it too. He placed a hand at the small of her back as they took their seats, a gesture that felt automatic and deliberate all at once. Josephine did not flinch. She leaned into his touch just enough for others to notice. Dinner progressed smoothly until Victor Pemberton spoke. He had positioned himself strategically at the center of the table, ensuring that his words would carry to every ear in the room. He lifted his wine glass slowly, swirling the burgundy liquid with practiced elegance, smiling as if he were offering nothing more than a casual observation. "Marcus," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room, "we have all been impressed by how quickly you resolved your wedding complication." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the gathering, nervous laughter from people who sensed conflict but wanted to appear relaxed. Josephine kept her expression neutral. Her heart was pounding, but her face revealed nothing. Victor continued, his gaze shifting directly to her. "Though I must admit, many of us are still curious. Mrs. Ashford, is it not unusual to step into such a role with so little notice?" The room fell completely silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. A public test disguised as civilized conversation. A challenge wrapped in polite curiosity. Marcus inhaled, preparing to speak. To defend her. To shut down Victor's attack before it could gain momentum. But Josephine answered first. "I believe uncertainty reveals more about leadership than preparation ever does," she said calmly. Her voice was steady, carrying clearly to every corner of the room. Marcus did not need someone perfect that day. He needed someone present, someone who understood the stakes and was willing to rise to meet them. A murmur rippled through the gathered executives. Victor raised an eyebrow, his smile flickering slightly. "And you believe you are that person?" He pressed. Josephine met his gaze without hesitation. She thought about the 4 years she had spent learning every aspect of this company, the crises she had solved, the disasters she had prevented. The loyalty she had demonstrated when walking away would have been so much easier. "I know I am," she replied. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Victor's smile had frozen on his face. The board members exchanged glances. The power dynamic in the room shifted almost imperceptibly, but Josephine felt it. She had not backed down. She had not deferred to Marcus. She had claimed her place at this table on her own terms. Marcus turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. But beneath the surprise, she saw something else. Respect, recognition, something warm that she did not have time to analyze. The dinner continued without further confrontation. Victor retreated into polite conversation with his nearest companions. The tension gradually dissipated as other topics filled the silence. But when the evening ended and Marcus followed Josephine into the hallway outside the private dining room, his first words were not about strategy or damage control. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did." Josephine kept walking, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "If I cannot stand beside you when it is uncomfortable, this arrangement will fail." He matched her pace easily, his longer stride keeping him at her shoulder. "You protected the company." She stopped and turned to face him. "I protected us." The word hung in the air between them. Us. Such a small word to carry such enormous implications. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, though she could not quite identify what. Then he nodded once. "Thank you," he said simply. Josephine resumed walking. He fell into step beside her, and they left the restaurant together in a silence that felt different from any that had come before. That night, Marcus stood alone in his office, city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. He had dismissed his driver, choosing instead to remain in the building long after everyone else had gone home. He was thinking about Josephine, about the way she had stood up to Victor Pemberton without hesitation, about the way she had claimed her place at that table as if she had always belonged there, about the confidence in her voice when she declared that she knew she was exactly what he needed. He had not worried about her embarrassing him, not once. He had not questioned her judgment or doubted her loyalty. He had simply trusted her to handle the situation, and she had exceeded every expectation he did not even realize he had. That realization unsettled him more than any hostile takeover ever had, because trust was dangerous. Trust made you vulnerable. Trust opened doors that were supposed to remain closed, and Marcus Ashford had spent his entire adult life keeping those doors firmly shut. The hostile investor attack came 2 weeks later. Rumors began circulating through financial channels that the Ashford marriage was staged. Anonymous sources suggested that Josephine Marlowe was nothing more than a convenient stand-in, a secretary who had been paid to play a role until the charter requirements were satisfied. The press caught the scent immediately. Headlines that had celebrated their romance now questioned its authenticity. Talk shows speculated openly about contract marriages and corporate convenience. Commentators reduced Josephine to a placeholder with ambition, dismissing everything she had contributed as a performance designed to secure financial gain. Josephine did not watch any of the coverage. She did not read the articles or listen to the podcasts or scroll through the social media speculation. She had learned long ago that engaging with criticism only amplified its power. Instead, she focused on her work, on the merger negotiations that required her attention, on the board relationships that needed nurturing, on the 1,000 small tasks that kept Ashford Industries running smoothly while its CEO dealt with personal attacks. Marcus called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. When the accusations surfaced during the discussion, Josephine did not defend herself. She sat quietly at the conference table, her expression composed, waiting. Marcus stood and addressed the room. My wife is not a distraction, he said. His voice was firm, carrying the authority that had built an empire from modest beginnings. She is an asset. She has contributed more to this company in the past 3 months than most of you have in years. Anyone who questions her position questions my judgment. And I suggest you think very carefully before doing that. The room went quiet. The executives who had been whispering exchanged uncomfortable glances. The crisis communications team stopped taking notes. Josephine felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with strategy or arrangement or contractual obligation. He had defended her, not because it was politically advantageous, not because their contract required it, but because he believed what he was saying. That night, as they stood together in the elevator rising toward the penthouse, the silence felt different, charged with something neither of them had acknowledged. I did not expect that, Josephine said softly. Neither did I, Marcus admitted. The elevator doors opened. They walked together toward their separate wings of the residence, their footsteps echoing in the marble foyer. Thank you, Josephine said, pausing at her door, for what you said in there. Marcus turned to face her. The dim lighting caught the sharp angles of his face, softening them somehow. I meant every word. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The space between them felt smaller than it had ever been. Not because of proximity, but because of something else entirely. Something they were both trying very hard not to name. Get some sleep, Marcus said finally. Tomorrow will be challenging. He disappeared into his wing before she could respond. Josephine stood alone in the foyer for a long time, listening to the silence of the penthouse, wondering when exactly this arrangement had stopped feeling like a contract, and wondering what would happen when they could no longer pretend otherwise. The private luncheon invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. It was addressed to Josephine alone, requesting her presence at a gathering hosted by Margaret Wells, one of the most influential society matriarchs in the city and a longtime ally of the Ashford family. The implication was clear. This was a test. Josephine dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing an understated designer dress that communicated sophistication without ostentation. She wore minimal jewelry. She pulled her hair back in an elegant twist that framed her face. Every detail was calculated to project exactly the image she wanted to project. The luncheon was held in a private dining room at the Wellington Club, the same establishment where she had attended her first gala as Marcus's wife. 8 women sat around an impeccably set table, each one representing a pillar of society that Josephine had previously only observed from the shadows. Margaret Wells presided at the head of the table, silver hair perfectly coiffed, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. She greeted Josephine with the kind of warmth that masked careful evaluation. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, gesturing to an empty seat at her right hand, "we are so pleased you could join us." The questions began before the first course arrived. Polite but sharp, probing but deniable, each one designed to reveal something about who Josephine really was and whether she deserved the position she now occupied. "How long have you known Marcus?" "We met 4 years ago," Josephine replied, maintaining careful eye contact with her questioner. "I began working for him shortly after his father restructured the executive team." "And your family?" Margaret pressed gently. "Tell us about them. My mother passed away when I was young. My father raised my sister and me alone. He worked 2 jobs to ensure we had opportunities he never did." A soft murmur of approval circulated the table. Working-class origins, spoken without shame or apology. It was a narrative that appealed to certain sensibilities. "Your career at Ashford Industries," another woman interjected. "It must have been challenging working so closely with such a demanding man." Josephine smiled slightly. "Every worthwhile pursuit is challenging. Marcus expects excellence because he himself embodies excellence. I learned more from working with him than from any formal education." "And now?" Margaret asked, her gaze sharpening. "What are your intentions? Will you maintain a role in the company?" The real question, finally spoken aloud. Were you after power? Were you after money? Were you after status? Tell us what you really want so we can decide whether to accept you or destroy you." Josephine set down her fork and met Margaret's gaze directly. "I do not intend to disappear," she said calmly. "I intend to contribute. Marcus and I built something together over these past years, though the world is only now becoming aware of it. I have no interest in retreating to the sidelines while he carries the weight of the company alone. I stand beside him. That is where I belong." The silence that followed was heavy with evaluation. The women around the table exchanged glances laden with meaning Josephine could not entirely decode. Then Margaret smiled. It was small, but it was genuine. "Well said, Mrs. Ashford. Well said indeed." The luncheon continued with lighter conversation. By the time coffee was served, Josephine understood that she had passed whatever test had been administered. The society matriarchs had taken her measure and found her acceptable. For now, that evening, Marcus listened as Josephine recounted the details of the luncheon. They sat together in the shared living room, a bottle of wine open between them, the formality of their usual interactions softened by exhaustion in the late hour. "They were testing your loyalty," Marcus observed when she finished. "They were testing your judgment," Josephine corrected. "Evaluating whether you chose wisely." He considered that for a moment. "And did I?" Josephine took a sip of her wine before responding. "I suppose we will find out." A faint smile crossed his features. Then it faded, replaced by something more serious, something more vulnerable. "I was worried about you today," he admitted. Facing that room alone, Josephine set down her glass. "You were worried?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Yes." He paused, as if uncertain how to continue. "I have become accustomed to facing challenges together. Sending you alone felt wrong. I can handle challenges alone, Marcus. I have been doing it my entire life. I know you can." His gray eyes held hers. "But perhaps you should not have to." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Something had shifted. Something had changed. The professional distance they had maintained so carefully was eroding, replaced by something far more complicated. "We should get some sleep," Josephine said finally, standing before the moment could stretch into territory neither of them were prepared to explore. Marcus nodded, but did not stand. He remained on the couch, wineglass in hand, watching her walk toward her wing with an expression she could not read. At her door, she paused and looked back. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for worrying." Then she disappeared into her rooms before he could respond. Marcus sat alone in the living room for a long time after she left, thinking about partnership and protection and the unexpected directions life could take when you stop trying to control every outcome. 6 months had passed since the wedding, and everything had changed. The charter deadline had been satisfied. The board had stabilized. Victor Pemberton had submitted his resignation 2 weeks earlier, citing personal reasons that everyone understood meant political defeat. The hostile investor attacks had faded as financial analysts confirmed that Ashford Industries was stronger than ever. By every metric Marcus and Josephine had established, their arrangement was a success. The contract was working exactly as intended, which made what happened next all the more devastating. "We need to discuss the dissolution," Josephine said, entering Marcus's study one evening without her usual preliminary knock. He looked up from his laptop and she was struck by how tired he appeared. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, tension knotted his shoulders. The weight of leadership had taken a visible toll. "Now?" he asked. "The charter requirements have been satisfied for 3 weeks. Josephine kept her voice steady, professional. "We agreed to maintain appearances for a transition period, but at some point, we need to address the reality of our situation." "And what reality is that?" "That this was always temporary." She had rehearsed these words, prepared them carefully. "A solution to a specific problem. You no longer need a wife to maintain control of the company. And I need to consider what comes next." "What comes next?" Marcus repeated flatly. "My career, my independence, the life I was building before this happened." She gestured vaguely, unable to complete the sentence. "Before I became Mrs. Ashford." Marcus closed his laptop slowly. The careful control he usually maintained was slipping, replaced by something raw, something wounded. "Before I dragged you into my mess," he said. "That is not what I said. It is what you meant." He stood, moving around his desk with controlled tension, pacing like a caged animal. "You have been planning this conversation for weeks, have you not? Working out the logistics, preparing the exit strategy. That is what you do. You plan for everything." "That is my job," Josephine replied, though the word felt wrong somehow. "Your job," he laughed, the sound bitter and unfamiliar. "Is that still how you see this? How else should I see it?" She spread her hands helplessly. "We signed a contract. The contract has terms. The terms are being fulfilled. And what about everything else?" Marcus stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. "What about the dinners and the conversations and the late nights and the way we have learned to anticipate each other's thoughts? What about the mornings when you know exactly what I need before I say it? What about the way you challenge me when everyone else agrees? What about the fact that I've told you things I have never told anyone?" His voice cracked on the last words. Actually cracked. Marcus Ashford, who controlled everything, who showed nothing, who kept the world at arm's length. His voice cracked. "Tell me you have not felt it," he demanded. "These past months. Tell me that has all been performance. Tell me you were just fulfilling the terms of our contract and nothing more." Josephine opened her mouth to deliver the denial she had rehearsed, the careful words that would maintain the boundaries she had fought so hard to preserve. Nothing came out. "I cannot," she whispered finally. "I cannot tell you that. Then why are we pretending otherwise?" The question stripped away everything she had been hiding behind, every professional justification, every logical argument, every careful rationalization. "Because I do not know how to be anything else to you." The admission tore free before she could stop it. "I have spent 4 years being your assistant, 6 months being your convenient wife. I do not know who I am if I am not serving some function in your life." Marcus reached for her hand, not demanding, not assuming, simply offering. "Then let me show you," he said. Josephine looked at his outstretched hand. This was the choice she had been avoiding since the moment she walked down that cathedral aisle. She could maintain her walls, protect herself with distance and professionalism, walk away with her independence intact, or she could take his hand and step into something terrifying and uncertain and potentially devastating. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and trembling slightly. He pulled her closer, close enough that she could see the vulnerability in his gray eyes, the fear he had been hiding behind his composure. "I am tired of pretending," he said softly. "I am tired of contracts and arrangements and carefully negotiated terms. I want something real. With you. Marcus, if we cross that line, there is no going back. I know." He lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle. "And I am terrified. But I am more terrified of watching you walk away." Josephine felt tears burning in her eyes. She had spent her entire life building walls, protecting herself from disappointment, preparing for the inevitable moment when people would leave. And here was this man, this impossible man, asking her to tear those walls down. "What if it does not work?" she whispered. "What if it does?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Josephine thought about everything she had to lose. Her career, her independence, her carefully constructed sense of self. Then she thought about everything she had already gained. The partnership, the trust, the feeling of belonging somewhere for the first time in her life. She leaned into his touch. "I am terrified too," she admitted. "Then we will be terrified together," Marcus replied. "And we will figure it out as we go." He kissed her then, properly, for the first time. Not the ceremonial brush of lips they had shared at the altar. Not a performance for cameras or audiences. This kiss was real. This kiss was a choice. This kiss was the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. And as Josephine melted into his arms, she understood that sometimes the best things in life come from moments we never expected, from people we almost overlooked, from chances we almost refused to take. The reckoning came at the annual Ashford Global Foundation Gala. It was the one event Marcus could not cancel without confirming every rumor that had ever circulated about their marriage. Investors, media, political figures, and society elite filled the grand ballroom of the historic Ashford Hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors, polished to mirror perfection. Everything looked controlled. Everything looked planned. But beneath the surface, tension hummed like a live wire. Josephine stood beside Marcus as they entered the ballroom, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She was wearing a deep burgundy gown that had been custom designed for this occasion, elegant without being ostentatious, commanding without trying too hard. She looked every inch the billionaire's wife, but inside, she had already made a decision. If tonight ended badly, she would do what she had to do. She would step aside, let Marcus reclaim his life, remove herself as a liability. She loved him too much to be the reason he lost everything. Marcus sensed her withdrawal immediately. He always did. "You are thinking about leaving again," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I am thinking about protecting you," she replied. "By disappearing? By doing whatever is necessary." Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Richard Coleman, an influential board member who had aligned himself with Victor Pemberton before Victor's departure, stepped onto the small stage reserved for donor acknowledgments. He He was a distinguished man in his 60s, silver hair perfectly styled, smile perfectly insincere. He waited for silence with the patient confidence of someone who knew he held power. "Tonight," Richard began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "we celebrate transparency, integrity, and trust, values that define leadership at Ashford Industries." Josephine felt Marcus's arm tense beneath her fingers, "which is why I believe it is appropriate to address the questions many of our partners have raised," Richard continued. "Questions about authenticity, about commitment, about whether the foundations of our leadership are built on solid ground." A hush fell over the room. Cameras shifted toward Marcus and Josephine. This was it, the moment Richard had been building toward, the public attack that would force them to either confess their arrangement or lie convincingly enough to survive. "This marriage," Richard said, turning toward them with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "has drawn significant attention. Some have suggested it was arranged for convenience rather than commitment, a temporary solution to a permanent problem." Josephine felt the weight of every gaze in the room, 300 people watching, cameras recording, the world waiting for their response. Marcus stepped forward, ready to defend her, ready to fight. "No," Josephine said quietly, stopping him with a hand on his chest. He looked at her startled. She released his arm and took one step ahead of him. Her expression was composed, but her heart was racing. This was either the bravest thing she had ever done or the most foolish. Probably both. "You are right," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom. She met Richard's gaze directly. This marriage did not begin as a love story. Gasps rippled through the audience. Marcus turned fully toward her, his expression torn between horror and confusion. "Josephine," he breathed. She raised a hand gently, never taking her eyes off the crowd. "It began as a solution," she continued, "a solution to a crisis that would have destroyed a company and countless livelihoods. Marcus Ashford was abandoned at the altar by a woman who had agreed to marry him for her own reasons. He had 6 weeks to find a wife or lose everything his family had built for 3 generations, and I agreed to help him." The murmurs grew louder. Richard's smile widened. "So you admit it was a contract," he said triumphantly. "Yes," Josephine replied, "and that contract ends tonight." She reached into her clutch and removed the folded document she had been carrying for months. The original marriage contract, its edges worn from being handled, from being read and reread during sleepless nights when she wondered what she had gotten herself into. Slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half. The sound was quiet, but it echoed through the silent ballroom like a thunderclap. She tore the halves again and again until the contract was nothing but confetti in her hands. "There is no contract," she said. "Not anymore." Marcus stepped forward, standing beside her instead of behind her. His expression had shifted from confusion to understanding to something that looked remarkably like hope. "There is no contract," he repeated, addressing the room, "not because it failed, but because I am done hiding behind it." He turned to face the crowd fully, his shoulders squared, his voice carrying with the authority that had built an empire. "When Josephine agreed to marry me 6 months ago, she did it to save a company she had dedicated 4 years of her life to building. She did it knowing the risks to her reputation, her career, her future. She asked for nothing except the chance to walk away when it was over with her dignity intact." His voice cracked slightly, but he continued, "I did not expect to fall in love with her. I did not plan for it. I fought against it with everything I had because I had convinced myself that love was a liability, that vulnerability was weakness, that needing someone else meant giving them power over you." He reached for Josephine's hand, holding it tightly. "I was wrong," he said, "about all of it. Josephine Marlowe did not save my company. She saved me. She showed me that strength comes from connection, not control. That partnership means more than transactions, that the best things in life are not the things we plan for." He faced Richard directly. "If any of you believe I need a transaction to lead this company, you are welcome to test that assumption. But this woman is here by choice. She chose to stay when walking away would have been easier. She chose me when I had given her every reason to choose differently." He squeezed Josephine's hand. "And I choose her," he said, "every day, for the rest of my life." Silence swallowed the ballroom. Then, slowly, applause began. It started near the back, uncertain at first, then growing stronger, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Richard's smile had frozen on his face. His carefully planned attack had backfired spectacularly. Instead of exposing weakness, he had witnessed a declaration of strength. Marcus turned to Josephine, his gray eyes bright with emotion. "No more pretending," he said softly. "No more protection through distance." For the first time since the wedding day, Josephine did not think about consequences. She did not think about headlines or power or what would happen tomorrow. She simply leaned into him and let herself be loved. The fallout was quieter than anyone expected. There were no dramatic resignations, no market collapse. Ashford Industries' stock dipped briefly when the truth about their arrangement became public knowledge, then stabilized as analysts recognized that the company's fundamentals remained strong. Richard Coleman tendered his resignation a week after the gala, citing a desire to pursue other opportunities. Everyone knew what that meant. The board, having witnessed Marcus's declaration and the response it generated, decided unanimously that questioning his leadership was no longer politically viable. Victor Pemberton's legacy of opposition crumbled. The company moved forward with renewed stability, but none of that mattered as much as what happened between Marcus and Josephine. For the first time in months, they found themselves without an emergency to manage. No headlines to answer, no appearances to perform, no battles to fight, just space and time and the opportunity to discover who they were together without the pressure of pretending. Marcus insisted on stepping back from the penthouse that had defined their arrangement. He chose instead a smaller townhouse he had purchased years earlier and never lived in. It felt neutral, untouched by contracts and expectations. Josephine arrived with one suitcase. "This is temporary," she said out of habit. Marcus smiled. So was everything else. The days that followed were simple in ways neither of them were accustomed to. Mornings without schedules mapped to the minute, dinners without agendas, conversations that wandered without purpose. Josephine learned that Marcus drank his coffee black, not because he preferred it that way, but because it reminded him of mornings spent with his father on the factory floor before he ever dreamed of boardrooms and billions. Marcus learned that Josephine had once turned down a full scholarship to stay close to her younger sister after their mother passed away. She had sacrificed her dreams so her sister could have opportunities she herself had given up. These were not dramatic revelations, but they mattered. Each small truth shared built something larger between them. Trust, understanding, a foundation that had nothing to do with contracts or arrangements or corporate necessity. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park near the river, Marcus stopped abruptly. "There is something I need to ask you," he said. Josephine turned, her expression curious but cautious. "All right." When this began, he continued slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I asked you to save me. Then I asked you to stay. But I've never asked you the only thing that actually matters." He reached into his pocket and removed a small velvet box. Josephine inhaled sharply. "This is not a contract," Marcus said gently. "There are no terms, no timelines, no guarantees. If you say no, nothing changes except my honesty." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring. Elegant, unassuming, chosen with care, not strategy. "I am asking you," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, "to marry me, not as my solution, not as my shield, not as a convenient arrangement that satisfied a corporate requirement." He took her hand. "I am asking you to marry me because I choose you, because I would choose you if I had nothing, because I would choose you if you could offer me nothing in return, because you are the first person who has ever seen me clearly and loved me anyway." Josephine felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She thought about the woman she used to be, the assistant who stood in the shadows, the secretary who fixed crises quietly, the wife who stepped into a wedding meant for someone else. Then she thought about who she was now, a woman who was loved, a woman who was valued, a woman who had discovered that her worth had nothing to do with the functions she served. "Yes," she said, "but only if we do this our way." Relief crossed Marcus's face, followed by something softer, deeper. "Name it," he said. "No press," she replied. "No board members. No society photographers. No 300 witnesses." He nodded. "Just us." "Just us," she agreed. They married again 3 months later in a small garden overlooking the ocean. Just the two of them, a handful of true friends, and a simple ceremony that celebrated love rather than obligation. Josephine wore a simple white dress she had chosen herself. Marcus wore a suit he had owned since before Ashford Industries became a global empire. There were no cameras. There were no expectations. There was only laughter and joy and the profound relief of two people who had finally stopped pretending. As they stood together, hands entwined, Marcus realized something that had eluded him his entire life. Control had never protected him. Connection had. Partnership had. Choosing someone and being chosen in return had. Josephine squeezed his hand, as if sensing his thoughts. They had begun as a contingency plan, a last resort, a desperate solution to an impossible problem. They ended as a choice, the most important choice either of them had ever made. And for the first time, neither of them was afraid of what came next, because they were no longer standing at an empty altar, waiting for someone who would never arrive. They were standing exactly where they belonged, together, always. If this story moved you, if you believe that unexpected love is possible, that loyalty deserves recognition, that the people standing in our shadows might be our greatest blessings, then I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you have not already. And share this story with someone who needs to hear that their moment is coming, that the love they deserve might be standing right beside them, waiting to be seen. Drop a comment telling me who is the person in your life who has been standing in the shadows, supporting you, believing in you, loving you even when you could not see it. It might be time to let them know they matter. There are so many lessons we can take from Marcus and Josephine's story. First, the people who save us are not always the ones we are waiting for. Sometimes they are already standing beside us. We just have not learned to see them yet. Second, arrangements can become love. Contracts can become commitment, but only when we are brave enough to tear up the terms and choose with our hearts. Third, true partnership is not about transaction. It is about two people who see each other clearly, flaws and fears and failures included, and choose to stay anyway. Fourth, your position does not determine your worth. Josephine spent years in the shadows, but when the moment came, she stepped into the light, and she proved that quiet strength is still strength. And finally, sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best people. If Marcus had not been abandoned at that altar, he might never have seen what was right in front of him. Our disasters can become our doorways. Our humiliations can become our beginnings. Thank you for watching until the end. Thank you for being part of this community. And thank you for believing in the power of storytelling to remind us what matters most. Until next time, remember this: the greatest love stories do not always start with romance. Sometimes they start with chaos, and two people brave enough to build something real from the wreckage. I will see you in the next one.